Recently on One with Mitch LaFon, I sat down with famed music producer Tom Werman to talk about his career and, of course, some of the biggest bands he's worked with, including Poison, Cheap Trick, Ted Nugent, Motley Crue, and many, many more. Both 1 hour interviews are available on iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Spreaker, and, of course, here on YouTube. Just look up at your screen for the annotation. So if you want to hear the entire unedited interviews, you just have to click over. For now, I'm just going to give you a small teaser. Here is Tom talking about Motley Crue in the first part of my interviews with him. Here is Tom Werman. Let's get right into Motley Crue first. Shout at the Devil, Theater of Pain, Girls, Girls, Girls. You've been working up until then with bands like Cheap Trick, with bands like Ted Nugent, which I would say are somewhat, at least on stage, less eccentric, less visual than Motley Crue. And how was it on that first album, Shout at the Devil, when the record company says, "All right, you're working with this band called Motley Crue." Were you expecting anything from them? Were you excited? Was it like, oh boy, what the hell is
No,
this?
I was not. I was not convinced that they were as good as they were. I went to see them. Someone sent me the Too Fast for Love album, and I remember saying back to them, "This is not really my cup of tea."
Right.
It was a little too sloppy for me.
Right.
So, but the circumstances about that album or around that album were, I was leaving Elektra Records because I couldn't really get along with the new president.
Right.
Because he wouldn't let me do my job. He wanted to drop Motley Crue.
Ooh.
And I my cat's here.
Haha, it's all right.
All right, hold on. I gotta close the door here. My cat.
Right. So he actually wanted to drop Motley Crue, though. That's interesting because here we are on the farewell tour 2015. That would have been a really bad decision.
Yes. Well, that's another story. But my agreement to do Motley Crue was part of my exit agreement there. I said I don't want to be head of A&R anymore, and they said, "Well, will you produce 3 records for us?" I said, "Okay, sure." So I didn't expect a whole lot from Motley Crue, but Shout at the Devil was the success of Shout at the Devil was a little bit of a surprise to me. I was neater and more. What would it be? I thought that Shout was a little grungy.
Right.
The sound of the album. I would probably have made it more pop.
Right.
Which is what I did with Motley Crue anyway. I'm not saying that I didn't make it more pop, but but I generally tended more pop. The reason that I succeeded with bands like Motley Crue is because I could help them fashion single hits that would get on the radio.
Right.
And in the 70s there was AM radio and FM radio.
Right.
If you had an FM hit, you could sell a few 100,000 records. If you had an AM hit, then you could sell 3 million albums. So I'm the guy that the record labels turned to get these unrecordable bands on the radio. So that's why Doug Morris called me to do Twisted Sister. That's why Elektra wanted me to do Motley Crue, because they didn't really know what to do
with them. When you say unrecordable, though, is that just because of the music they were doing was hard to find a slot in the top 10, or do you say unrecordable because here are these, and it's been widely publicized, out of control, drinking, drugging guys, musicianship. Is that what you mean by unrecordable, or do you just mean?
Well, a lot of times labels would wind up with bands that, and they wouldn't know what to do with them. It's like, okay, now we have this band. How are we gonna make it hit? And there were record company presidents that would ask me to do things and would say, it was as if they didn't know how the band got on their label. Doug Morris said, I've got a band here. They're doing pretty well in Europe, but I can't get them arrested in the United States. You're the only guy who can make a hit record with this band. Please do them. So of course you did them, because you don't turn down a record company president.
Right, of course.
And that's the same thing that happened really with Motley Crue and with Poison. Although Poison had some success with their first record.
Right. Which I happen to love their first record. I mean, you did open up and say, "Aw."
Yeah.
With, and just going to ask you, with Motley Crue, fans have debated for years, is Nikki a good bass player, is not a good bass player? Is it convinced sing, convinced not sing? When you heard them and you had them in your studio, did you say, okay, wow, this is true, what am I going to do with this? Or do you think, yeah, no, these guys are perfectly fine. I don't know what people are complaining about.
Well, it took us it took us 3 or 4 hours to do a bass part with Nikki on Shout.
Right.
Now, granted, he had broken his shoulder, so it was
Okay.
a little challenging for him to play bass. But by the time we got to Girls, 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 he was an accomplished bass player. I just adjusted our time schedule to allow for a whole afternoon to overdub the bass part. I didn't think, Vince and Nikki were not, in the beginning, were not that really that accomplished at their craft.
Right.
Tommy and Mick, I thought were amazing. Nikki became great, and of course he was the creative engine behind Motley Crue. He was a great writer. He was a great lyricist. He was a brilliant image maker.
Right.
Look what he did. It was truly astonishing, for a high school dropout. But his bass playing, it improved over the years. Tommy was a brilliant drummer right off the bat, and I think Mick is one of the most underappreciated guitarists I've ever worked with.
Yeah, it's true. When you look back to the 80s and you think of the guitar heroes, and you think rightly so of Eddie Van Halen, Randy Rhoads, and even Warren DeMartini from Rat, you go, okay, George Lynch, yeah, okay, I go. But nobody says Nikki, not Nikki Sixx. Nobody says Mick Mars. You go,
right.
But he's great.
Well, look, Mick has a particular. He's a really, really great rhythm guitarist, and he's like Keith in a way, because Keith is not a technician.
Right.
He's a feel guy, and he comes up with the most brilliant guitar riffs in the history of rock and roll. I think Keith Richards. The signature Stone guitar riffs are without parallel. Without equal. Mick did the same thing for Motley Crue.
The sound changed from Shout at the Devil to Theater of Pain to Girls, Girls, Girls. It certainly went more into that pop element, more radio friendly. Was that your influence, or was that a record company influence, or was that just Nikki Sixx saying, "Hey, man, I want to be on MTV more"?
No, it was part me, and it was part technology improving.
Okay.
It was part Tommy got into programming drums, sampling,
Gotcha.
Electronics, stuff like that. And Mick finally got a very competent guitar tech
Gotcha.
who helped us achieve a really good guitar sound that I liked very much. Like the guitar sound on Girls, Girls, Girls is where I wanted them to be.
Yep.
They 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 did a little bit of changing along the way. That's all. I think that the sound that we came out of the studio with on Shout was appropriate for Shout. But by the time we got to Girls, Girls, Girls and Wild Side, I thought that was a great sounding record.
The band also re-recorded Shout in '97, and Nikki Sixx has said on record, blah, 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 Tom Werman, yada, yada, yada. Why do you think he feels that way? Why does he not appreciate what was done and the sounds that, I mean, you go
You'll
to
have
the...
to ask. You'll have to ask him.
Is that annoying to you, though?
I'm sorry.
Is it
What?
annoying to you that you have these great success? Okay.
Of course. It's not unusual for rock stars 20 years down the line to look back and say, well, he didn't really have our sound down, and he didn't really do this right, and he didn't really do that right. I have to remind everybody that at the time when they were selling gazillions of records, it was all, "You're beautiful, babe. We love you. This is fantastic." I mean, Nikki, we were fine then. I spent time at his house. The night he was declared dead and released from the hospital, we went out for sushi. Literally that following evening.
Right.
We were fine. 20 years down the line, there are certain things that a band, who used to be much bigger, they're looking back and they're saying, man, we didn't get here, we didn't do this, we didn't achieve that. We're not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame yet. Let's blame the producer.
Right. Right. But you go to their farewell tour.
What we didn't achieve may have been partially his fault. So,
right.
I'll just say, well, he didn't do it. It was Werman.
Well, it's weird because I saw 3 farewell shows, and the set list, which was static each night, was essentially 2/3 or even more songs from those 3 albums.
Right.
So
look at
can't be that bad.
There is a very it's a little awkward for me to say this, but it's something that I couldn't help but notice over the years, and that is that with every artist I worked with, the hit artists, there were 7 bands that I worked with who had gold and platinum records. Every single one of them had their biggest record with me, and the one following that if I stopped working with them, or if they asked me to stop working with them, they disappeared.
Right.
It's that simple.
Right.
And yes, it's boastful, and yes, okay. But the fact is that I took these bands, somehow these bands made it to the top of their career, of their creative achievement
field or whatever. Yeah.
When I was working with them, and when I stopped working with them, they stopped being successful.
Well, I'll give you that for most of the bands. You look at Cheap Trick, from Dream Police to All Shook Up. Yeah, there's a big drop off. To some of those other bands, Motley Crue, Dr. Feelgood.
Dr. Feelgood is the one exception.
Right.
It was a brilliant record, and it sold more than Girls, Girls, Girls. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that.
And there you have it, folks. A quick excerpt from my part 1 of 2-part interviews with producer Tom Werman. In this part, of course, we spoke about Motley Crue, but if you listen to the whole unedited versions, you can hear more stories about Poison, Dokken, LA Guns, Love, Hate, and many, many more. Find the One-on-One podcast on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spreaker, and TuneIn. Please subscribe, and also come back to the YouTube page and watch more of my videos. I'll be doing a lot of these, what do you want to call them, previews if you want, or little snippets so that you can get a taste of an interview before you launch yourself into the longer, half hour, 1 hour interviews. I hope you enjoy this. Find me on Twitter at Mitch LaFon, and of course at the One on One Mitch LaFon Facebook page. The with is not on the Facebook page title because we just couldn't fit it in. There you go, folks. Thank you, and bye for now. Cheers.